that there are some things that are going to break what people think is how life works. They're going to transform people's lives. They're going to do stuff that everyone said couldn't be done.
Mm-hmm.
Not because it can't be done, but because God has taken that thing, whatever that is, and put it on hold, waiting for you. You're the person he put in place to go do the awesome thing, whatever that awesome thing is. I don't know what it is. You may not know what it is. But if you don't try, it's definitely not going to be it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And I think there's an element of saying, you know what? It is entirely possible that God's put me here to do that thing. So we're going to give it a shot. And not to do it necessarily recklessly or whatever, although sometimes God calls us to take some pretty remarkable risks. But to be willing to try and follow that, because it just might be that incredible thing that happens is because he's been holding that for you, and that's part of his plan.
From the Florida Parent Educators Association, home of the largest homeschool convention in America, this is the Not by the Book podcast. I'm your host, FPEA Chairman Suzanne Nunn, and together we will hear from guests who share their journey to who and where they are today. Each one of them at some point left the expected path, ripped the page out of the book that says you have to do it like this, and made their own way. I hope these conversations inspire you as much as they do me. In today's episode, I am talking with Joel Grewe, former director of Generation Joshua and the executive director of HSLDA Action. Joel's journey to who he is and what he does today highlights the power of how crucial decisions made by others in a moment can pave the way to us finding the place that we are meant to be, a place where we can impact the lives of others around us. Listen in to hear Joel's story.
I guess if I'm going to tell the story of my childhood, I have to start a little before it began. I'm an adopted kid. I've known that ever since I was growing up. My parents never disguised that or anything. They were always very upfront about that.
Right.
But I didn't really know the story of that until after I got married, at least not the full story. I just knew that I came from a place where my biological mom was convinced that she couldn't take care of me, and that was pretty much what I knew. And also that God had gone to great lengths to get me to the family I was in. So that was kind of my knowledge as a kid growing up. After I got married, my wife and I were looking at starting our family, and the doctor was like, hey, do you have any medical history, that sort of thing? And I'm like, I know nothing. I'm like, well, if you could get that, it'd be good. Okay, cool. So kind of did some poking around and said, we could do that. And I started doing a bit of a hunt to see if I could find my biological mom. And I did. It took a little bit, but there's occasionally you'll see like websites where someone who gave a kid up for adoption is like, if you ever want to reconnect, here's how to get a hold of me, et cetera.
Right.
And I being a typical male that has the emotional range of a teaspoon, made that feel like a very large life choice that was very complicated and drove my wife up the walls for about 6 weeks as I was trying to figure out if I actually hit the button to say contact or not. But I did. And I learned the story. So my biological mom grew up in a small town out in the country. And with a bunch of her friends, when she was really young, 13, decided to go to the local fair that was coming through. It was like a circus carnival type thing, right? And
Right.
there was an incident that involving, basically, it was a drug and rape situation that was applied to her. And statistically, it's very uncommon for those people. She was 13. Yeah.
Wow.
Statistically, that's very, very, very uncommon to result in a pregnancy, but it does sometimes. Okay, that's me.
Wow.
She woke up later not knowing what happened, was understandably, legitimately terrified, hid the effect, hid everything about it that she could, until she couldn't. At that point, based on her parents and her understanding, they were at the view that this was a human, and it hadn't done anything wrong. And she was convinced that she, as a 13, now 14-year-old girl, was not prepared to raise a child. An understandable assessment. But she decided that there was one thing that she absolutely could do. She was a believer. And she was like, all right, I can't take care of her. So she went to her family, I think her pastor, and said, hey, I can't take care of this child, but I want them taken care of. I would like you to find me a Christian mom and dad who will take care of my son because I can't. I want them to be his mom and dad. And that bounced around the U.S. a little bit, and it landed with my parents' pastor, who my parents had been told they couldn't have kids and they were looking to adopt. My dad's a lawyer, actually. He does adoptions. Like, he understands how complicated those can take, and particularly 40 some years ago, those were not fast, easy, or all that coherent processes.
Right.
We've moved a long way in that area from where we are to where we are now. But they agreed and went through the process for adoptions, which got a little interesting because once they said yes, my dad was so sure it was going to fall through, he wouldn't let my mom buy anything for the nursery, couldn't buy any clothes, couldn't buy a crib, couldn't do any of the stuff because he knew the likelihood of this falling through was pretty high.
Wow.
And he really didn't want my mom to suffer through the emotion of having all of that in the house and then not having the baby, right?
Right.
And then right after I was born in South Dakota. And my parents lived in Washington State, so they were going to fly out and get me. And then my mom got a cold.
Oh, no.
She wouldn't be allowed in the hospital. So my dad got on a plane and flew out to South Dakota to pick me up. And the nurses were very, very uncomfortable letting a man walk out of the hospital back in the 80s with this baby.
Oh, wow.
That was not his.
That's great.
That got maneuvered and worked out, but that's what brought me home.
Wow.
And I found a couple years ago, someone had those old, rotating big on your camera with the big wheels footage where they don't get audio. They were just barely doing personal video cameras at that point.
Right.
Of my mom waiting at the end of the runway, whatever it is, when you come off the plane, the jet bridge, waiting for me. And I won Mother's Day that year because we found the footage and digitized it and gave it back to her. Oh. And my brothers were like, we can't compete with this. I'm like, that's true. But it's a one-time thing. I can't do it again. So they settled down. But it was, and there comes my dad with me in this little basket because the nurses were like, here's how you hold a baby because we're pretty sure you don't know. But he did a great job getting me home. And I grew up with my parents in Spokane.
Okay.
I didn't know that part of the story. I didn't know the suffering that my biological mom had gone through. I didn't know the lengths that God had gone through to get me where I was going to be or the sacrifice she'd made to put me in the family I was in. Right. But in each one of those moments, God had a really remarkable hand in my life.
Absolutely.
And so,
yeah,
jumping forward to where we are now, or where we are 15 years ago now, she didn't exactly have an easy life, as you might expect. That leaves trauma,
right.
That leaves marks. My biological mom, had grown up, gotten married, and had lost her husband 16 years ago now. And I didn't know that, but I knew that I needed some information, and I decided over the course of the fall, actually it was about this time of year, November, that I decided we started looking, and then I sat on it from about now until Christmas.
Wow.
And drove my wife up the walls because I couldn't make the decision whether I'd reach out or not.
Right.
It's still one of the points in our marriage where it's like, would you please just come to a decision? I'm like, it's really hard. I've got about 2 emotional brain cells I can rub together here to figure this out, and it's just not very fast processing. And we did, and I couldn't quite write it. So my wife's like, how about this? I'll write the email and just say, I think my husband is your biological son, to kind of bridge it, just in case it was the wrong person, because it might have been the wrong person.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, we can do that. And so we send the email off, and then nothing. We hear nothing. And what it turns out is that she had earlier that year lost her husband. It was going to be her first Christmas alone.
Oh, wow.
And so she was driving across the U.S. to her parents. They had a cabin out in Montana, and she was driving from Minneapolis or something. Couple-day trip, nice and slow and pretty somber. And then she gets there on Christmas Eve, and she pulls open her phone, and she checks her email. And
wow,
there's this message on Christmas Eve
crazy
that she's not expecting. It was the moment where, in her telling of the story, God's like, I know it's hard, but I've got you. Because she was a believer. She is a believer. She still does. She actually does medical missionary work overseas now. And I've gotten to meet her new husband, her son. I've seen God's work in their life. And my part of that was very much a part of that process. But it was a beautiful thing to see. It's always made me recognize that things don't happen by accident. God is very much sovereign. He is good.
Yes.
And sometimes you don't understand how good he is until way after the event or the moment. You see him moving people into places and ways to do remarkable things in preparations of things that you can't even conceive of coming.
Right.
That's
So
kind of where
true.
I came from. But beyond that, I grew up as a kid, basically in the suburbs of Spokane, Washington, and then basically as a farm kid. My dad is a lawyer who really wants to be a farmer. So it means that we would buy farmland and muck around and pretend to farm and build really big gardens that the deer kept eating and milk cows really in the morning that I do not like, but I can do. That was me growing up. But I'm a tech guy and a political guy and a policy wonk, and I've run for office. I've done a lot of different things there, but that was my life growing up. And through all of that, I always understood and believed that God had a very specific purpose for me, and that when it talks about adoption in Scripture, about how we are adopted as sons and daughters of God, I'm like, I've been picked twice.
Isn't
Once
that
by my
beautiful?
father and
Yeah,
by my parents here on earth. And it's a treasure.
it is.
That's a little bit of my background growing up. I don't know if that...
It's an incredible story. And like I said, I had not heard it from you. I've heard bits and pieces and from my kids who highly admire you because of their connections with you through the years. But we, have been just so blessed by the work that you do. Our family, but not just our family, so many others who have. So I got to know you just as Joel with Generation Joshua and with HSLDA, probably a little more than a decade ago now. And
a little more.
Yeah.
It's kind of mind-blowing.
Isn't it crazy? So, I was really unsure of kind of where you had come from as far as even being a homeschooled kid or not. And, all these things that we were able to learn more over the years. But what happened, I guess, in your youth or young years in college? What drew you to where you are now? Kind of what was your steps to getting to HSLDA and Generation Joshua?
Sure. So there's a couple steps to that story. My interest in working with youth ministry really was part of my growing up. Mm-hmm. I was homeschooled. I had to talk my mom into it. She didn't want to do it. I'm weird. We started homeschooling when I hit junior high, not elementary. So we did the reverse. People, you'll see homeschool elementary and then do something else in high school and junior high. We did something else for elementary, and by junior high and high school, I'm like, please, Mom, please, can you homeschool me? And she's like, I don't think I can do that. I'm like, I will homeschool myself. Just please let me try it.
And
then
that
we
worked.
homeschooled all the kids.
There you go.
But it worked.
It worked.
We tried it for a year, and then it kept going. It's funny that. So we did that. But one of the things that my parents understood was that it was utterly crucial, in spite of that we be robustly engaged in what we would call biblical community. Mm-hmm. And so we were involved in our church very deeply. My dad was an elder there, so it was kind of one of those, if the doors open, we're probably in the building somewhere. Like, that was kind of true. Not quite,
I understand
but
that.
Really almost a pastor's kid, but not quite, right?
There you go.
My parents were both involved in ministry as just an incumbent part of our life. It was part of our weekly pattern as long as I can possibly remember. That included my dad teaching seminary in Russia when the wall came down and a bunch of stuff. Like, we had a lot of those different experiences as part of life. Family would go on a mission. We did a mission trip as a family for a month down in Venezuela back in 2000. A lot of that. Right. But it meant that if youth ministry was involved, I was there. And I developed a real love both in the ministry, and then really quickly, we had a really good youth pastor. His name was Bob. And Bob came to the realization very quickly as he was starting the job that these junior high and high school kids who are homeschooled, they can show up before the other ones do, and they can do setup.
Yeah.
And we're like, yeah, we can do setup. That'd be great. So we would all show up way early and do all the tech and the sound and the lights and all the stuff you need to get the night running, and kind of became the student ministry team by default, and like part of the worship team and the other stuff. And we really took ownership of what it meant. And then, so as we were leaving high school, a bunch of us just kind of stayed around and kept serving and became the leadership team for that. Right. And so serving, particularly with the high school ministry, has been part of my life since I was in high school. Okay? That's common. Like, part of what it means to be a believer is not just to receive from the church, but to give back into it and to the rest of the body. And so that's been part of it. That is a core component also of Gen J. And so that part of resonance there with HSLDA and Gen J in particular has always kind of had this, well, I've been doing ministry like this since the 90s. Right. Even if at HSLDA, Gen J didn't even exist until the 2000s. Right. So we're just hitting our 20-year anniversary this year. But I started doing junior high ministry and high school ministry in the late 90s. Right. as a member in the ministry and then continuing on. So that was part of it. At the same time, I really like policy and politics. I find that really interesting. My dad did some of it. He was the local Christian lawyer, so people would call him to say, what do we do in this election and that? Because they assumed he would know, and he usually did. So there was kind of this network my dad was involved in, but he never actively was like campaigning or running for office or anything. Although he knew a lot of the people because he was a lawyer. And so and he would work with a lot of nonprofits and other stuff. He did some adoption work, et cetera. And in Spokane, the judges are elected. Okay, so he kind of bounced into that a little more than most. But my grandfather, he was political. He worked not as a political guy, but he led kind of this group of farmers out in the area we grew up in. And he did a lot of work with them on economics and helping them with selling their product and whatever. But anytime the local press wanted to know what the farmers thought or what the weather was doing or what the local almanac would do, they'd talk to my grandpa, and he's sitting in his office with his desk making these contracts, and he'd hang up his suit and change out the slacks and put on the overalls just like the farmer's supposed to look, and then march out into the field to meet the truck driving down from the city. And he'd talk about what's going on and what the farmers care about and how that's going to affect ag politics. And,
that's great.
That was part of his role. But it also meant that he got to meet people running for governor, people running for Congress, et cetera. And I had a bit of an interest in that. And because I was homeschooled, I could do part-time work really early. I would work with him every day of the week for 3-4 days a week, helping take care of some local groundscape and stuff. But he knew my interest. And so when opportunities would come up, he'd invite me in.
Isn't that great?
It was so cool.
You had the freedom to
As
go.
a kid, I'm like a 12-year-old meeting someone running for governor, and I'm like, she's really cool.
Yeah.
I don't know your name. That's really cool. And so he's like, hey, we're going to go make phone banks. And I'm like, I don't know what that is, but I'll come, sure. And so he kind of gave me the first taste of it, and I'm always grateful for that. My dad figured out I liked that, so he'd take me to trainings and classes and to learning how to think deeply, our logic and policy and kind of critical thinking and debate. A lot of that involved that because my dad did have an interest there. And then we got involved as a family, we kind of got involved, but particularly me, in a race we got involved in the Newt Gingrich race, which was way back in the day during the, not Newt Gingrich proper, but it was one of the people that was part of that contract with America. The Speaker of the House was of the House at the time, lived in my district.
Okay.
And he didn't serve as the Speaker of the House when we were done with that race.
Right.
That was the power flip. Tom Foley, I think was his name, was the Speaker of the House. And he went down when Newt Gingrich came in, but our race was the battleground to determine that.
Wow. And
so I've been involved in kind of the local town politics there. There's a member of Congress who just is retiring in a couple of weeks, but she served for a long, long, long time from there that I helped with her election races a couple times. So I had this interest in politics, and I had this interest in ministry. And I was told growing up that you have to pick one or the other. They don't mix. You get to do politics, you get to do ministry. And I fundamentally beg to differ.
Okay.
I think politics needs ministry. And I think people in ministry need to understand how the political process works. And we saw that in COVID, how those things smashed together in ways that really caught people off guard.
Right.
Okay? And I think if you want to find a really dark part of America that needs Jesus, looking at politics is always a great option for you to go, I think I know where biblical character and compassion could serve really well.
Right.
So I've always kind of tried to straddle both of those. And that is actually kind of what led me to Gen J and HSLDA, because we have a ministry, Generation Joshua at HSLDA, that teaches kids how to engage in politics from a biblical perspective, but a robust biblical perspective, not just saying, what does the Bible say about these topics, but how do we live as Christians in this realm?
Right.
Okay. How do we live as citizens in this realm? And so that had my interest. I was roughly aware of it. I got involved with it in 2007 as an intern. I was coming out here for some additional education, a second degree, and what I didn't know was that God didn't really have the second degree in mind for me. What he wanted me was to be in the right spot at the right time for an internship, of which there was going to be one, opening at Gen J that I didn't know about.
Wow.
I didn't even apply for it. I applied somewhere else, but someone's like, I think this guy, he's got politics and youth ministry background. He'd be great for this. So we'd driven out here. I was on the 495, which is the beltway around DC, which is on the top 10 of worst traffic options in America, and navigating with a stick shift because I didn't know that I needed a not stick shift with a flip phone before smartphones.
Oh, yeah.
And I got a call from a number I don't know, but they didn't have the spam we do today, so I answered it stupidly. And I got interviewed for a position, an internship position, from an organization that I knew a little bit about, but definitely for a job I didn't apply.
Right.
And within a couple of weeks,
That's great.
I was working there. Yeah.
That's great.
That's how I got to Gen J and to HSLDA.
The first intern.
Not the first, but the first one at that point.
Okay.
They had some beforehand,
Okay.
but they had one internship opening,
Okay. And that was going to
and
be you.
they needed someone, and they called me. And that was because a guy in a different organization who's nearby saw my resume on his desk and went, "That's not for us." And he goes, "Normally," and I've talked to him about this twice now. He's like, "Normally, anything that comes to me," because he's the CFO of a different company. He's not really the hiring guy. But every once in a while, you drop it off and he sees something. He's like, "Normally, those go in the circular filing basket underneath my desk."
Yeah.
But he's like, I need to stretch my legs. So he walks out of his office and out of the suite of offices and down the hall and up the stairs and to a different end of the building, to a different company and different offices. "Hey, you might like this guy," and drops it off. And he goes, "To this day, that is the only time I've ever done that.
That's
Ever.
great.
I don't do that. I don't know why I felt compelled to do it that day, but I did."
Well, and it's a good move because you have found a place that certainly was right for you, and you were right for it, and I think that even just in the story of the development of Gen J over the last 20 years in and of itself is amazing. But I think what I've loved is I've known you and watched you is that, yes, you were highly engaged there, but you've done other things. And
I have.
I think that you have modeled exactly what you said in the beginning. You don't have to separate the two things. You've been actively involved in political ventures and you've been actively involved in ministry. And that's so important. And I think that you've modeled that so well. And
I've tried.
Well, and effectively. And I think, so give us a little bit of background for those who are maybe listening that don't really understand Gen J. If you can give us just a little bit of the trajectory of Gen J, where you've come from with that, because it's become, like I said, I talk to people like everybody knows about it, but they don't. But it's been such a intrinsic part of our lives for years, right? So just a little bit about that.
It's a division of Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Okay, it's part of HSLDA. If you're not familiar with them, you should look them up. We won't try and fill it all in right here. But Homeschool Legal Defense Association is a Christian ministry that defends the freedom of home education in the U.S. and also a little bit around the world. Generation Joshua is a division of that, and it really exists to take homeschool students, but we don't limit homeschool, but primarily homeschool students who, middle school and high school age, who want to learn what it means to be a good citizen, to be a responsible citizen, how to use their citizenship well, and understanding that comes, we teach that from a fundamentally Christian perspective. What does it mean to be a good citizen and a Christian at the same time, engaged in the responsibility that comes with being a citizen in our country? And I think we sometimes forget that we as Christians understand the concept of stewardship, and it's most often applied from churches in terms of like budget and dollars, right?
Right.
But stewardship is a lot more than that. It involves our talents. It involves our time. It involves a lot of different things. And one of those, I would argue, is it involves our citizenship, which includes our vote, but also our voice in the civic and political arena. Not every country has the same, not every citizen, depending where they live, or every person, will have the same obligations. But in our country, it's a we the people. So if it's a we the people have some responsibility for what happens. And that can be exercised in a variety of ways. And so we built this to do two things. One is to teach and educate young men and women what it means to be a good citizen. Okay, what does that look like? No matter what field God calls you to, what your path and career and life journey looks like, part of it, if you're an American, will involve being a good citizen. That's just kind of an incumbent duty we have that comes from where God's placed us. And not only does it have that aspect to it, but also for people that want to do more than that and actually get involved, how does it work lived out in the pressure cooker that is politics? So we do both of those. The value that brings to homeschooling is that we have homeschoolers who are equipped to engage their voices productively and biblically in the political arena that includes the defense of homeschooling. Like, that has had attacks at different times in history. We have another wave coming, as it were, right now.
Right.
That we're kind of starting to undergo. And having people in that area, but also just in society, who understand the value of freedom, how to defend it, how to advocate for it, and do it in a way that has a smile and is compassionate to people, and at the same time is principled, and understanding how to make those things harmonize is really important to the long-term safety of home education. but also just what it means to be a good citizen. So there's a dual or maybe a tri-value here to the person as a citizen, to homeschooling as a movement and for the freedom there, and also just the idea of being a good citizen. So we have people from all walks of life and all sorts of backgrounds that come to learn that. So we've had almost 30 plus thousand high schoolers that have come through Gen J since it was founded 20 years ago.
That's crazy. But, I think, too, the thing that I find, and it's very important, you have your mission there. And yet when it comes out and walks out the other side, with these students, I think that what I have seen, because I've seen, my kids, but I've seen their friends and a ton of other people now that I've known that have been a part of Gen J. And those students learn to, most of them communicate in a way where they don't fear expressing what they believe, and they can do it effectively and kindly, in a way that's not going to just offend. It may because of your values, but not because they're being rude. And it's just, they become confident in the ability and the acceptance for themselves that it's okay to have strong values. It's important to understand how to defend and protect those values. And I can do it. I've been given the tools to do it and do it well. And I think that that's so much of the value and what, walks out the door, not to mention all the other things in leadership. And I think it's funny because I can count up pretty quickly a number of the students that I know personally that have come out with the same thing, where they feel like they're called to politics and ministry. And how do you make a choice? Because it's funny that, I think you were so well suited for this position that you've had for so many years, because you've actually interacted with other people who felt the same struggle, and given them a tool and a way of seeing this differently. And I think that that's been huge. But so I appreciate what you've done there, and thank you for that. And I want to talk a little bit too about, because part of your story is what you've done politically yourself.
That's true.
And
that's true.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. So one of the things that we talk about is the kind of the misattributed quote to Edmund Burke, where it's, all that's necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing, right?
Right.
We've heard the quote around. There's debate about whether he actually said it, but nonetheless, the aphorism is quite true. Several years ago in our town, probably 6 years ago now, give or take, a town I live in, it's a little town called Percival, we had a scandal, kind of a cascade scandal, a sequence of them that managed to get our little town on the front page above the fold of the Washington Post, and not for good reasons.
Oh, no.
Okay. And I won't go into the details of the scandal, but suffice to say it was significant and it was broad. And it was problematic. And I confess I was frustrated by it. And one of my Gen J graduates, actually, who lived in Loudoun County at the time, decided that he also found that problematic and decided that he needed to ask me a question. So one night he showed up at my house with a copy of the Washington Post. And he goes, you talk about how important it is as citizens and believers that when something's problematic, you have to do something about it, to be engaged. So I have to ask you a question. Is that you just talking philosophically, or do you believe it? I'm like, oh, we're pulling out those guns. I'm like, I do believe it. And to be fair, it's not like I haven't put my time and effort in. At this point, I think I've clocked 150 different campaigns I've been involved in one form or the other. Mm-hmm. It's a lot. I've put my bid in for King and Country, okay? And a fair bit more.
Right.
Far more than average. But I hadn't done anything local. I tried to avoid local because I tend to find it petty and challenging for a variety of reasons. He goes, but the town needs it, doesn't have a good solution. I think you should run. Like for council, for our town council. I said, oh, I'll think about it. I'll pray about it. At that point, I should have just thrown up my hands and given up because we knew where this was going at that point. And so I came back a little bit later, said, fine, I'll do it, but you're going to be my campaign manager and you're helping. He's like, what? I'm like, oh, no. You don't get out of it either. You saw a problem, felt like you needed to do something. Your solution was to come to me. My solution is to say, I'll help, but you're coming too. He's like, right. That works both ways, man. So he and I and then another Gen J-er got together and started putting together a campaign, and we ran a campaign for town council. It's kind of an oddity as an outsider. I'd never done politics before, at least for myself. Mm-hmm. And I worked really, really hard and won. surprisingly. I kind of was shocked by that. And I served for 4.5 years, which was interesting because that included all of COVID.
Wow.
Tiny. That was not on my dance card for serving in town office, which involved everything from the lockdowns to the police protocols to the where you could go to get food at the restaurants. Like a lot of those rules were done at the state level and the local level.
Right.
And we had some very intense discussions about what it meant to be free and how enforcement was being done and how the governor's rules were being handed out. And how, what sort of congregating was being permitted or not, and how we would go about approaching that if there was an issue that we needed to address. But at the same time, people had rights. And so it became a very interesting discussion. There were several times where it's like, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to do that. That's just unconstitutional or illegal. I remember we had a moment at one point where, and this was right before COVID, we had a little like a Parks and Rec group that was working on putting an event at our town park. Cool, great, the community's gonna love it. And they're like, we want everyone to come, and people to sponsor, et cetera. They said, but no politics. We want it to be a politics-free zone. So if you are a campaign or a party or a PAC or whatever, you can't come. But everyone else is welcome. There's a problem with that. It's a public park. Everyone is invited. And you're saying except for political speech. And at one point I just had to look at them and I'm like, you do realize that what you're suggesting is unconstitutional. And they're like, what? I'm like, believe it or not, the Constitution applies to the Parks and Rec Committee. And they were looking at me like that had never entered their mind. They just wanted a peaceful night. And I admit, politics is not always the most exciting, or maybe the most, it can be very exciting, maybe not the most calm experience on occasion. But they definitely weren't interested in violating the U.S. Constitution. They just had never considered it. And so myself and the lawyer had to sit down with them and go, okay, guys, here's how this works. And we changed course. And I discovered when we started dealing with that the single most common violators of the U.S. Constitution are actually not the federal government or the state governments. They have lots of lawyers that keep them from doing that usually. It's the local stuff. They don't know better.
That's crazy.
And it became a tool to take what I've done and show people. So I served at some stuff at our state level. I worked with our state transportation departments, working on legislation and working on policy maneuver and working on we worked on water supply for the town, and we had to do taxes and we had to do staff stuff, and we had a massive scandal we had to dig out of.
Right.
With a huge bunch of lawsuits. And I got to know more about human nature than I ever wanted to know. Some of it is stuff that I'm bound from ever talking about.
Right.
But it was an eye opener like nothing else. I learned how valuable a free press is, believe it or not, because we got to a place where there was literally one paper functioning, and it picked a side, and it didn't matter what you said on the other side, they would take it, twist it, and stab you. And as someone who definitely has been on the receiving end of some pretty negative press, I definitely can appreciate the value and the importance of a free press.
Right.
But those became experiences that I was able to take to my kids and to Gen J to teach and other things. I did parliamentary procedure all the time. I became kind of the on-call parliamentarian. We had a parliamentarian, but they came to me because I knew more.
Right.
Because I taught it to kids for a decade at Gen J.
Right.
And then we started using it.
That's great.
And those experiences became valuable tools, both in my development, but also in how I could teach other people, which I truly love. But I will say this, it is stressful as all get. If you are in office, you're running for office, and you're serving, you have my respect, even if I don't agree with you.
Right.
That is not an easy thing to do.
That's a harrowing
Particularly
job.
if you're trying to balance having a family and all the rest of it.
Yeah. Well, and it is harrowing. And I think, for good and bad parties involved, it's not fun because you're always going to be bashed. You're always going to get hate. You're always going to get, the people who love you and hate you. And it's a hard place to serve. And like you have to respect the fact that people will put themselves out there and continue to do it, even with all the crazy. So you're no longer serving in that capacity. Nope. Are you still serving in local government at all at this point? Or are you
Nope, not right now.
Mainly focused
I did 4.5 years. I ran for mayor, lost by about 150 votes, give or take. 150 voters,
Wow.
I think it was that's the margin. It's a couple thousand people in the town, about 10,000. Didn't quite work, partly because of that paper I was talking about. Not a big fan of that one.
Not a fan.
But it's what it is. I will find myself sleeping a lot better not having to deal with it.
Yes.
We had our first election without me involved a couple days ago, and you know what?
You were okay.
It was
with
okay to walk in and vote and walk out. I've done my bit. I got to meet some great people, some great civil servants, people that I know people on the right will occasionally ridicule as a government bureaucrat, but honestly were really incredible people that worked really, really hard. And I've met some ones that I'm like, that's a problem. And just like anything else in society, you got people that behave in admirable ways and not admirable ways.
Right.
But it was good. So I'm not currently involved there. However, I'm definitely still involved in government, but mostly through my job at HSLDA now.
Because
at the federal level.
recently you moved, your position changed a bit. So you were the director of Gen J for a number of years. And
almost 12 years. By far the longest serving director we've had.
Yeah. And so you moved from that position into another position. You want to tell us about with HSLDA?
Sure. So I'm the executive director of HSLDA Action. HSLDA Action is basically the legal entity that holds all of our lobbying work and our government relations work. So Gen J is still part of that. Jeremiah, who's the new director, he reports to me, and I'm still very much involved in what Gen J is doing. In fact, we're launching something brand new in about 5 days. Well, not launching, we're doing the brand new thing. Right. I'll tell you about that in a minute.
Yes.
But at the same time, and it's really cool. But at the same time, that also includes our federal policy work. So I'm working on Capitol Hill pretty regularly. I was briefing a senator's staff on background last week on why it may not be the best plan for the government to go in and mandate the number of hours it takes to homeschool anywhere in the United States, and why we have to define homeschooling in a very precise way. They definitely didn't have any experience with it. The staffers were all probably were 20-something and definitely had not been homeschooled.
Right.
And so we had to do some education. That was really important education. In a sense, it's lobbying, but really what it is just here's how this works. And it is vital that people do that.
Yes.
If you don't, well-meaning people are going to do something very dangerous. And that was really where this was headed, with someone who was really, really kind-hearted. They were seeking truly to help. But the method they were using was going to do a lot more harm than good. So we got the methodology sorted out, and I'm happy with what their idea they're pursuing. It'll be really cool if it happens. I'm not at liberty to say what it is yet, but with that sort of presence, you can do some really good work, and you can prevent a lot of bad. So that's something HSLDA has been doing for a long, long time. Gen J has been involved always, but now that's directly under my responsibility. We have our political action work. We have Gen J. We have a couple other divisions that I'm responsible for. But I kind of live in the policy shop of HSLDA now. So that includes our model policy, where we suggest model bills for legislation for state legislatures. If they want to try and expand freedom for home education in their states, or just generally expand freedom, we're happy to help. I represent HSLDA to a lot of the different partner groups we work with, like the American Legislative Exchange Council, the State Policy Network, some of those groups. Those networks are really how we build and retain our freedom, because it's these alliances of like-minded institutions and individuals all across the states. And so I get to be the ambassador that travels out carrying the homeschool flag and helping solve problems and figure out things. And when people have an idea, say, hey, that's a great idea, but we really need it to not be done this way. We'd really like it to be done that way, because you're going to hurt people that you don't mean to hurt over here. So there's a lot of that. Often it's people just not understanding how it works. I honestly got a taste of doing law on the town council, where I would write law. And now I still write model law. You do not need to be a lawyer to write it. But you're going to need to talk to one of them or two of them at that point. And we have some really good ones at HSLDA, so that's pretty easy to just go down the hall. But that's been great fun. We're going to be actually launching one of our newest pieces of model legislation, which is an educational tax credit. So if the idea is that if you educate your kids at home, or you just educate them in some form other than the government. So if you're not using a government school, we suggest it is probably worthwhile for the state to give you a discount on your taxes. Now, how that works out in detail takes a little bit. But frankly, generally speaking, if someone's educating the kids on their own dime, either at a private school or a homeschool or some other variation of that's not a government school, they're saving, on average, a state government $12,000 to $25,000 if you're New York per kid. That's a great savings. But none of that passes on to the parents, to the families. And what it means is that you functionally have a penalty, an inherent penalty built into our system of government, to take the education of your kids seriously as your responsibility, rather than the government's responsibility. And we think that is an inherent a discouragement or a disadvantage to home educating that we think is an injustice that should be addressed. So anyway, that's one of the projects I'm working on. And we've been having great fun with that. And we're going to be putting that up for review and hopefully endorsement by the American Legislative Exchange Council in a little less than a month.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to hear how that one goes because I think we've talked about it a little bit. Yeah. So
it'll be up for committee review in 2 weeks, right before Thanksgiving. They have a subcommittee that looks at it, and we'll be going there to battle because there's definitely debate over how it's best done. And then it goes to the actual large-scale committee in D.C., I think on the 5th or 6th of December. No, the 4th or 5th of December.
Yeah.
If it crosses your mind, pray for me that day. That'll be a very busy day.
It'll be a day. That'll be a day. So, and you have other projects that you're working on.
We do.
We
have one other big item that's launching next week.
Okay.
So you want me to give you a little bit of that. HSLDA, its primary mission is to defend the freedom of people to homeschool their kids. And I'd say we do that rather admirably and rather capably. But part of that process is making sure that we educate the public on the value and virtue of homeschooling, how good it is for kids and how good it is for people. Sometimes that's talking about how great their scores are and how good their test results are and how good their careers are and how good they are in college and how good they are on this and this and this and this and that. And there's a long, long list that we can go through. But sometimes it involves being homeschoolers who go help people in need. Sometimes we help other homeschoolers who are in need, but other times we just go help. Our Gen J clubs do this around the U.S. when there's an area that needs assistance. It's not uncommon for those clubs to get together and activate to help in whatever their local issue is. But other times you get something like what happened with the hurricanes to hit the southern U.S. North Carolina in particular, but Asheville specifically and the greater area around it got hit very hard by Hurricane Helene.
Right.
We've had a slew of them this year, and I think at this point we were realizing that we have 13,000 homeschool families across the U.S. that we know of that are in disaster zones from these hurricanes.
Wow.
That we know of. There's more, but those are the ones that we actually have an address for.
Right.
Okay, over 13,000 families. Asheville and the area around it, the Appalachians, were definitely hit harder. They're not exactly prepared for hurricanes like you guys are down in Florida. You guys are a little more accustomed to that than maybe the rest of the U.S. You've got some experience under your belt.
Yeah.
We're going to drop a team of homeschoolers into Asheville next week. We're sending 55 homeschoolers, their parents, and the Gen J leadership team to go work on disaster relief, not necessarily helping homeschoolers, but as homeschoolers helping people in need.
That's great.
We have the capability to just get up and go. Our flexibility is unlike any other educational system. You know how much work it is to basically take 5 days off of school if you have an entire system of people and not everyone's going, and what do you do with the kids that aren't going and all the rest of it?
Yeah.
It's a complicated mess, which is why that's something that's really hard for them to do.
Right.
But in our case, we're like, yeah, someone needs our help. We can spin this up in a couple weeks.
We can do it.
And so we're going to do that. We've got people coming in from all around the U.S. who are going to assemble in Nashville, and we're going to spend 3 days probably shoveling out mud and cutting and like cutting and dragging trees and doing all the stuff that needs to be done to clean up things. And frankly, at the same time, sharing the love of Jesus with people who need it and are in a really hard spot right now. We're partnering with Samaritan's Purse, which ironically is being one of our points of contact down there is actually a Gen J alum who now takes what he learned at Gen J and uses it to organize people coming in to do relief efforts in Jesus' name to help them. He was actually our national award winner. His name is Peter Bergen.
Oh, yeah.
We've written articles on him and other stuff where he got the national award for our leadership probably 5, maybe 7 years ago. And lo and behold, he's working at Samaritan's Purse. And we're like, hey, Peter, we want to come help. And he's like, oh, yeah. So he was walking through their process. And I'm like, I was talking to him last week. And I'm like, Peter, this looks very familiar to our student action teams. And he kind of smiled. He goes, it does, doesn't it? I'm like, are you borrowing? He's like, oh, only kind of. I'm like, well, more power to you. Like, there's an element of taking what we do and taking it and using it in ways that advance what is good and do what is right and help people that are in need, that show compassion. And at the same time, take the skills and talents God's given us and use them in powerful ways. So anyway, that's new for me. I'm really thrilled. My oldest son is getting to come with me. He hasn't got to go on one yet. He hasn't been old enough for it, but he is this year.
That's great.
So we're going to take a trip down to North Carolina and get some dirty clothes on and go shovel mud and drag branches and talk to people.
That's phenomenal. So let me ask you this. What do you love most about what you're doing?
It really kind of depends on the day because each day I'll run into something I love. I love getting to teach. I love watching kids' eyes light up and go, oh, I understand that now. Oh, that makes it. I mean, I've got kids who come to me. It's like, you had that thing you said at that one time, and that's changed the course of my life. And the worst secret is that I don't remember what I said. Like you'll have that conversation, you're like, that chapel you taught, that time we spent in Esther or Ruth or whatever. And I'm like, oh yeah, I did preach that message. I'm like, I don't remember what I said. It's probably in the notes somewhere. But it was what God had for them there. And I get to see God take the little bit that we give, kind of our 5 loaves and 2 fish, as it were, from Matthew, and then, or from Mark, and then take it and turn it into something amazing in people's lives. That happens in 1,000 different ways.
Right.
But it is the coolest thing to see. And I love that about my job. I also get to work with really good people, which is also really nice.
You do get really good people. I'll agree with that.
We're really picky, and I don't have as many openings as I'd like to hire people for, but man, I'm glad of the people I get to work with. God has blessed me with a very talented team.
So, according to your story, it wasn't necessarily what you were aiming to be doing right now, but it fulfilled a dream, a desire that you had. And I know you get to talk to a lot of young people. How do you encourage them to pursue their dreams and to follow their passions?
I find that it is not uncommon that people tell kids that they need to be reasonable in their dreams. It's like, well, that's not possible. Why don't you try and level set to something more realistic? Mm-hmm. And there's a place for that. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. As a parent with a freshman in high school, I'm like, oh my gosh, you got to have a job, an idea that's a job that you can put food on the table and pay the bills, right? So not discounting that at all.
Right.
But I am convinced that there are some things that are going to break what people think is how life works. They're going to transform people's lives. They're going to do stuff that everyone said couldn't be done. Mm-hmm. Not because it can't be done, but because God has taken that thing, whatever that is, and put it on hold, waiting for you. You're the person he put in place to go do the awesome thing, whatever that awesome thing is. I don't know what it is. You may not know what it is. But if you don't try, it's definitely not going to be it. Mm-hmm. Okay? And I think there's an element of saying, you know what? It is entirely possible that God's put me here to do that thing. So we're going to give it a shot. And not to do it necessarily recklessly or whatever, although sometimes God calls us to take some pretty remarkable risks. But to be willing to try and follow that, because it just might be that incredible thing that happens is because he's been holding that for you, and that's part of his plan. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we don't know what's at the other end of that bridge till we start walking on it, whatever that is. It does a little bit of that Indiana Jones scene where you walk out onto thin air, right, as he's trying to cross the canyon because you can't see the bridge, but it is there.
Yeah.
And on occasion, that's what God calls us to do too. And I will tell you, it doesn't jive with modern society where everything's planned and figured and we have everything organized and we know exactly what's going to happen and where we're going to sleep tonight and where our food's going to come from, etc. And there's a place for all that. Mm-hmm. But there's also a place for going, Lord, this is where you've called me to be, so I'm going to go step.
Yeah.
And then step after that and see what happens. And he does incredible things.
So
I've seen kids do stuff that they didn't think they could do.
Right.
I've seen high schoolers balance the federal budget. Okay, like there's something that you can't do. But I've also seen them do some other incredible things with incredible impact that I had never conceived of.
Yeah.
Didn't think it was possible. But they were willing to try it, and I wasn't going to get in their way. And then we saw beauty.
I think it's so true. When you find yourself in the place where you were uniquely created to be, using the gifts you were uniquely created to use, I think it is amazing to see the impact that you can have, on other people and in the world we live in. I love that you've been willing to share your journey with me today. One of the things.
Thank you for the invite.
Oh, absolutely. It's great. And I think one of the things that always is a little bit interesting to me, just personally, and I know it's sometimes hard, but I know there are things that kind of stick with you sometimes that you hear along the way, whether it's a book you've read and there's a great quote in it or a great historian's quote. Sometimes, your mom said something to you that just really sticks. What would you say was out there in the way of a quote or something like that had an impact on your journey?
I've got a few, but I admit I pulled up my notes of the ones I was looking at. I occasionally sketch down the things that matter,
right,
that I find impactful. But one of them, and this is more in the political box, but it mattered. I got a chance to tour George Bush's presidential library down in Dallas several years ago. And it was pretty cool. If you ever get a chance to go, I do recommend.
Okay.
But he had an observation at one point, two, but one of them really stuck with me. And he said something to the effect of this. He goes, America has never been an empire. We may be the only great power in history that has had the chance and refused, preferring greatness to power and justice to glory. That's not perfect. We've done stuff that's, not perfect in our history. Every country has to a degree. But fundamentally, there's a truth reflected in there that we, just because we could, doesn't mean we should.
Mm-hmm.
And that there is a legitimate goodness and greatness in doing the right thing rather than trying to accumulate all the power.
Right.
And I think believers, there's an aspect of that as well, because I don't need to accumulate power. I don't need to accumulate influence per se. Those may happen. They may not. Money's nice for paying the bills, right? But at the same time, we don't have to do all that because we know the source where we get what we need. And I think Bush understood that to a degree that was particularly insightful and particularly helpful in that regard. So that'd kind of be my thing.
That's great. I love that. I think that, what you said before in the beginning too, just that good people have to do what needs to be done and have to be out there and doing the right thing. And
all that matters for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing.
Yes. And that is important, as is how we're ending it here with, just because you can do something doesn't mean that it's going to be the right thing to do. And I think that that's huge and reflecting on where we are right now in our country too. And in the homeschooling movement and everywhere. So thank you so much for what you do. Thank you for the way that you impact lives every day. But thank you for pouring in, for being obedient and for being faithful and being committed to your work.
Suzanne, it's been a pleasure to chat with you, but it's been really more, it's a pleasure to know you, to know your kids. Thank you for letting me and my team get a few years worth of time to speak into their lives as they grow up too. It's been really incredible to see how they become, and even just what you do with FPEA and our opportunities to be able to come in there and teach and mentor. It's both a blessing to see your guys' leadership and whatever, but also just a blessing to be able to be part of it, and we're really thankful for it.
Well, thank you. Likewise.
Of course. To another 10 years.
To another 10 years. I will say that.
Like
yes, absolutely. Thanks for listening to the Not by the Book podcast from the Florida Parent Educators Association. To learn more about homeschooling in Florida or to find resources to help you on this amazing journey, visit our website at fpea.com. If you have any suggestions for future guests, contact me, Suzanne, at notbythebook@fpea.com. Thanks again for listening, and be inspired to live your life not by the book.